My fiancé chose my sister. So I'm choosing for myself.
What are you asking me?
Marry me. Today.
You have no authority here anymore. I still own the controlling shares. The mechanic confessed under oath. Warren ordered my brakes cut.
Ethan controls Caldwell Capital. You let me believe you had nothing?
I needed someone who chose me first.
She had spent 8 months planning a wedding that lasted 11 seconds. The moment she opened the door of Suite 412 and saw Colin's jacket on the chair and Sophie's shoes beside the bed, she didn't cry. She didn't yell. She picked up her bridal bouquet from the hallway cart and walked back through the lobby, past 200 guests who'd spent the morning commenting on her dress, and out the front doors onto the sidewalk. That was when she saw him. A man in a wheelchair, alone outside the venue, watching the street like he had nowhere better to be. He looked at her the way no one else in that lobby had. Not with pity, with recognition. Welcome to today's story. If you enjoy emotional drama and shocking twists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. 18 hours before the wedding, everything in Nora Hayes' life had still made sense. She had checked the seating arrangements twice, confirmed the catering order, and texted Colin a photo of the table centerpieces with the caption, "Tomorrow." He replied with a heart. That was the last message they exchanged before everything changed. The morning of the wedding, Nora was in the bridal the Susampait on the 4th floor, getting her hair done when the coordinator knocked and said one of the groomsmen had left his bâtonnière in Suite 412. Could Nora grab it on her way past? She said yes without thinking. She was still thinking about the centerpieces. She found the door to 412 slightly ajar. She pushed it open. She saw Colin's jacket on the chair. She saw Sophie's shoes beside the bed. She heard Sophie laugh at something, Colin said from inside the bathroom. The kind of laugh that meant they were comfortable with each other in a way that had nothing to do with last night. She stood in the doorway for a count of 3. Then she picked up the boutonnière from the entry table, pulled the door closed quietly behind her, and walked back down the hall. She didn't go back to the bridal suite. She went to the lobby. 200 guests were arranged across the lobby and ballroom entrance, champagne in hand. They had comments about her dress. Several of them touched her arm as she passed. She smiled. She kept out walking. She pushed through to the front doors and stepped out onto the sidewalk. The man in the wheelchair was parked just beyond the entrance canopy, a coffee cup balanced on his knee. He was somewhere in his mid-30s. Dark jacket, quiet face. He looked like someone who had learned to observe a room without being part of it. He was watching the street and he turned when the door opened. He looked at her for a moment. "I watched from out here," he said. He had a calm, direct way of speaking. A woman walked through a lobby full of people who were looking right at her, and none of them saw her. Nora looked at him. "My fiancé is inside, with my sister, I know. I've been out here for 2 hours. I saw her arrive." Nora sat down on the low concrete planter beside him. She still had the boutonnière in her hand. She set it down on the concrete. Her phone's in her dress pocket. She ignored it. Inside the lobby, she could see through the glass that Sophie had appeared and was speaking to their mother. Her mother touched Sophie's arm in the same way she had never quite touched Nora's. Nora watched her mother nod. She watched Sophie look relieved. The man beside her watched her watch them. "My name is Ethan," he said. "Nora, do you have somewhere to go, Nora?" She thought about it honestly. Her apartment was the one she'd been planning to vacate next week, after the wedding. She had already transferred most of her things. Her friends were all inside. Her parents were inside. "No," she said. "Neither do I, at the moment." The lobby doors opened and her mother came out, and behind her, surprisingly, Colin. He was still in his groomsman shirt, no jacket. He had a particular expression on his face, the one he used when he needed to manage a situation. "Nora." Her mother's voice was careful. "Let's go somewhere quiet and talk about this. There's nothing to talk about." Colin made a choice. "We can be mature about. I'm being perfectly mature." She stood up from the planter. She looked at Colin. He didn't apologize. He opened his mouth, and she understood from his expression that whatever came out of it would be a reframe. She didn't wait for it. she turned back to the man in the wheelchair. The words came out of her before she fully thought them through, but they felt more deliberate than anything she'd said in months. "Will you marry me?" He looked at her steadily. He didn't seem surprised. He thought for a moment, the way someone thinks when they're taking a question seriously rather than dismissing it. "Yes," he said. Her mother made a sound. Colin said her name. Ethan picked up his coffee cup and drank from it calmly, as though he'd just agreed to something small and straightforward. Nora's phone buzzed again. This time it was Sophie's number. She declined the call. "I don't know anything about you," Nora said quietly. "No," Ethan agreed. He said it without apology. There was something in his manner that suggested the information gap went both ways and that he was fine with that for now. Colin took a step toward her. "Nora, this is don't," Ethan said. His voice didn't change volume. He didn't look at Colin. He just said the word once precisely, and Colin stopped. Nora looked at Ethan. He was watching the street again, coffee in hand. He looked like a man who had dealt with much larger problems than this one, and had learned to hold them without showing it. She picked up her bouquet from the planter. She didn't look back at the lobby doors. "You said you didn't have somewhere to be," she said. "That's right." "Then let's go." She walked to the street. He drove himself in an adapted vehicle, parked at the curb. She hadn't noticed it until he moved toward it. He opened the passenger door from the driver's side with quiet efficiency. She got in. As they pulled away from the curb, Colin's number appeared on her phone. She watched it ring. "He's going to say it was a mistake," Ethan said without looking at her. "I know. Is it?" She set her phone face down on her lap. Outside, the wedding venue fell behind them. "No," she said. "It really isn't." They were married at 4:17 in the afternoon at the Multnomah County Courthouse. 2 witnesses, a court clerk who happened to be heading home, and a woman from the license office who agreed when Ethan asked, signed the certificate. The ceremony took 6 minutes. There was no music and no flowers, unless you counted the bridal bouquet Nora was still holding when she walked in. She set it on the counter while she signed. She forgot to take it back. On the drive to Ethan's apartment, neither of them spoke much. He navigated through evening traffic with practiced ease, his right hand doing most of the work on the adapted steering controls. Nora looked out the passenger window and watched the city slide past. Her phone had 18 missed calls now. She'd turned the volume off after the 7th. "You can answer those if you need to," Ethan said. "I don't need to." He let that stand. His apartment was in a quiet residential building in the northwest part of the city. Ground floor, accessible entrance, moderate street noise. He unlocked the door and she followed him in. It was a single-bedroom unit, neatly kept without being clinical. A desk against the far wall was covered in papers and a laptop. There were 2 bookcases, technical texts, some economics, some history, a small kitchen, large windows, no personal photographs anywhere that she could see. He gave her the brief layout. Bathroom there, kitchen, 1 bedroom. He slept in the living room on a fold-out. He'd adapted the space after the accident. She could take the bedroom. "When was the accident?" she asked. 5 years ago. He said it the way someone says a fact they've said 100 times and stopped feeling anything about. "And your family decided a man who couldn't walk wasn't useful to them." He said it without bitterness, just measurement. "They gave me a monthly allowance, and this apartment. Far enough from their circles. They wanted me invisible." He paused. "You should know what you married. I do know what I married." She looked around the apartment. "You were watching that lobby for 2 hours. You didn't look like a man with nothing on his mind." Something shifted in his expression, too brief to name. "I have things on my mind," he said, "but nothing that concerns you." She considered that. "All right." She pulled off the shoes she'd been wearing since morning. "What are the house rules?" "I don't have many. Give me one," he thought. "Don't open anything on the desk." "Done." She looked at the kitchen. "Can I cook?" "I haven't stopped you." She moved to the kitchen and opened the refrigerator. It was organized with the precision of someone who lived alone and planned efficiently. She found eggs, some leftover rice, a half-used jar of soy sauce, and enough vegetables to make something. She started cooking without asking any more questions. Ethan moved to the desk and opened the laptop. She heard him typing behind her. the apartment filled with the sound of the stove and his keystrokes. At some point, she heard him say, quietly but distinctly, to his phone, "The Morrison file doesn't go to anyone until I've reviewed the final numbers. Tell Langford he can wait." His voice had a different register than the one he'd used with her, a few degrees colder, very precise. She kept her eyes on the pan. After dinner, eaten at the small table near the window without ceremony, he thanked her for cooking, and she said it wasn't anything. He washed the dishes without being asked, moving efficiently around the kitchen on the manual chair. She noticed he'd done it before and didn't need instruction on where things went. She went to the bedroom at around 9. The room was clean and simple. She borrowed an oversized shirt from the closet that he said she could use, and she lay on the bed and looked at the ceiling. Through the wall, she heard him typing for another hour. She was almost asleep when she heard the sound of him moving through the apartment, and then the quiet click of him stepping onto the small balcony. Through the thin wall and the glass she heard, fragments, can defer the Hartwell position until Q4, but the exposure needs to be hedged before then. Run the numbers and get me a scenario. A pause. "No, I'll make that decision myself." Another pause. "That's not negotiable, Leo." She stared at the ceiling. His voice carried a quiet authority that had nothing to do with volume. It was the voice of someone who was used to being the final decision in a room. She had worked in events coordination for 7 years, and she'd been in a lot of rooms with people like that. She could hear the difference. She heard him come back inside. The balcony door clicked shut. The next morning, she woke before him and made coffee. He emerged at 7:30 and looked at the coffee on the counter. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I was already making it." He poured himself a cup, sat at the desk, opened the laptop. She glanced at the desk on her way past. The papers on top were dense, columns of figures, legal language, some kind of financial structure document. She didn't read anything, but she saw the numbers. They were in 9-digit range. She was good with numbers. That wasn't a monthly allowance review. She looked away before he noticed. She carried her coffee to the window and watched the street below. Behind her, Ethan said, "I'm going to be working most of the day." "That's fine." She turned. "I'll find things to do. There's a library 2 blocks east." He said it like a footnote. "And a good hardware store on the corner." "Hardware store?" He looked up briefly. "The window latch in the bathroom is broken. I haven't gotten around to it." She looked at him for a moment. "I'll take a look," she said. He returned to the laptop. She looked at the desk, just a glance, not reading, only measuring, and she saw the edge of a spreadsheet with numbers that kept accumulating. One column had a header she caught only partially before she looked away. Caldwell Capital Consolidated Trust Assets. She didn't say anything about it. She finished her coffee and went to look at the window latch. On the 3rd morning, Sophie sent a message. Nora read it at the kitchen table while Ethan was on the balcony with his phone. The message was 3 paragraphs. It was carefully written. Nora recognized the tone of something that had been drafted and revised. Sophie said she was sorry it happened this way. She said she hoped Nora could understand that sometimes feelings couldn't be controlled. She said she hoped they could eventually find their way back to being sisters. The last paragraph ended, "I'm sorry, but you have to admit we were a better fit." Nora read it twice. Then she blocked the number. She set her phone down and finished her coffee. The previous night she had woken at 2 a.m. to a sound she couldn't immediately identify, a low, controlled sound, the kind a person makes when they're trying not to make any sound. It was coming through the wall. She lay still and listened. It stopped. Then it came again. She understood what it was, pain. Ethan in the next room, controlling his breath around it. She lay there for a while and thought about what she was going to do. In the morning, she told him she was going out for a few hours and would be back in the afternoon. He said okay without looking up from his laptop. She walked 4 blocks to the closest physical therapy center and went inside. The receptionist told her they didn't normally do walk-in consultations. Nora explained what she needed. She was married to someone with a spinal injury and chronic neuropathic pain from an old accident. She needed to learn the basic physical techniques for pain management and what not to do. She would pay for whatever time the therapist could give her. The therapist, Dr. Anita Rowe. Had 30 minutes between appointments. She ended up giving Nora 2 hours. Nora took notes. She asked specific questions. Dr. Rowe showed her the pressure points along the scar tissue bands that ran the length of a spinal burn injury, the way to apply weight and then release, how to read when to stop. She also said something near the end that Nora didn't write down, because she was paying full attention. Patients like this, long pain, long time, alone. Some of them develop habits. When the nerve pain gets bad enough and they can't control it, they create a different kind of pain they can control. Something smaller. If you find marks on him you can't explain, or a locked door and silence after a bad night, don't leave him alone. Nora said she understood. She walked back to the apartment. Ethan was at the desk. She set her bag down, made 2 cups of tea, and brought one to him. He looked at it, then at her. I went to a physical therapy center, she said. Learned some techniques for the kind of pain you're dealing with. I'm not going to push you about it. But if you want to try something tonight, I know a few things now. He was quiet for a moment. He looked like he was deciding whether to be offended or not. I don't need. I heard you last night, she said, not unkindly. Just a fact. You were trying not to wake me. You weren't doing great. The silence between them stretched. He looked at his tea. He picked it up. Not tonight, he said. Okay. She went back to the kitchen. 2 days later, after a bad morning where she could see from the tightness in his jaw that the pain was flaring, he said, without looking at her, you could try that, whatever they showed you. She crossed to where he was sitting, and she worked on the scar tissue along his lower back, the way Dr. Rowe had demonstrated. She did it carefully, and he didn't say anything for a long time. At some point, the tension in his shoulders came down. Where did you learn that? He said. I told you, I paid someone. You didn't have to. I can't sleep when someone in the next room is in pain. He didn't respond to that, but after a while he said, press a little harder to the left. There, she adjusted. He exhaled slowly. They were still like that when a knock at the door broke the silence. Ethan's manner shifted immediately. I'll get it, he said, and she stepped back. The man at the door was in his early 40s, in a jacket that cost more than anything else in the apartment. He had a leather portfolio under his arm and an expression of careful neutrality that was clearly professional. He stopped when he saw Nora. This is my wife, Ethan said. His tone made it clear this was information, not an introduction requiring anything from her. She's heard things. Speak normally. The man, Leo, she gathered from context, glanced at her, then back at Ethan. He set the portfolio on the desk and opened it without speaking. Inside were a series of documents. Nora didn't move closer. She stayed where she was and watched Ethan's face as he scanned the pages. He was completely focused. He asked 3 questions. 2 of them required Leo to reference a second document. The third Leo answered from memory. Ethan made a note on one of the pages. He handed the portfolio back. Push the Greenway decision to next week, Ethan said. And tell Hartfield I want the liability review from outside counsel, not internal. Of course, Leo said. Thank you. The dismissal was polite and final. Leo closed the portfolio. He glanced at Nora once more, not impolitely, more like someone calculating what had shifted in a room he thought he understood, and then he was gone. Nora sat down on the couch. Ethan was looking at Desi. She asked, Someone who works for me. Doing what? A pause. He closed the top document on the desk. I had a company, he said finally, before the accident. She waited. Some of that is still mine to manage, he said. The details aren't something I need to get into. Okay. She kept her tone even. He looked at her then, a direct look, measuring. Like he was trying to understand why she wasn't pushing harder. She wasn't pushing harder because she had decided the first morning that she was not going to treat him like a puzzle to be solved. She would watch, and she would wait, and she would learn what she could from what he chose to show her. He nodded once, as if he'd read that somewhere in her stillness. I'll explain more at some point, he said. I know you will. She stood and went to start dinner. She didn't look at the desk, but she held in her mind the shape of what she'd seen. The portfolio, Leo's manner, the quality of the decisions being made. This was not a man living on an allowance. This was a man operating something significant from behind a wall of apparent simplicity. She put water on to boil and thought about what it would mean to be married to someone with that much to hide. She thought it might mean she needed to be patient. She had always been good at that. The engagement announcement appeared on a Tuesday morning, 14 days after Nora's wedding day. She saw it on her phone while making coffee, a photo of Sophie and Colin at a rooftop restaurant somewhere, glass house raised. Sophie's smile perfectly calibrated for the camera. The caption said they were excited to share the news. The comments were full of hearts and exclamation points. The account had 2,000 followers. Nora noticed her own name did not appear anywhere in the post, as if she had never been part of this story. She set the phone down. She poured her coffee. She drank it, standing at the window watching the street. Ethan came in from the bedroom where he'd been on a call since 6 in the morning. He saw her face and said nothing for a moment. Then, "Sophie? She and Colin are engaged." He poured his own coffee. "How are you?" "I'm fine." She meant it. Not the performed kind of fine, the actual kind, the kind that came from having already processed a thing and found it smaller than she expected. The anger had burned off quickly. What was left was mostly clarity. "Good," he said, and sat down at the desk. She watched him open his laptop. She had the impression, over the past 2 weeks, of a man who ran on very little sentiment and a great deal of precision. He didn't waste words. He didn't perform comfort. He registered things and moved on with what needed to be done. She had started to find it restful. What she didn't know, what she would not know for a while longer, was that at 9:17 that same Tuesday morning, Ethan sent a message to Leo that set something in motion. Leo received the message in his downtown office. "Marsh Analytics. Find out what they have in the Caldwell Capital referral pipeline. Then pull it." Leo called back within an hour. "All of it. All of it. That's a $3 million referral relationship. Marsh is going to want a reason. Tell them." "Compliance review," Ethan said. "Their internal records flagged discrepancies in how they've reported third-party arrangements. They can dispute it. They won't succeed." There was a pause on the line. Leo said, "This is about the Hayes situation." Ethan said, "This is about a firm that doesn't meet our due diligence standards." "The timing is the timing." Leo said nothing for a moment. "Then it'll be done by end of day." Nora didn't know about the call. She was on her way to the grocery store. 3 days later, her mother called. Nora almost didn't answer. She let it ring 4 times before she picked up. Her mother's voice had the careful quality of someone who had rehearsed what they were going to say. "We'd like to see you. Come for dinner on Friday, all right," Nora said, before she decided to be cautious about it. She went alone. Ethan said he was fine. She could see he was telling the truth. He had a stack of documents that required his attention, and he was already absorbed by the time she left. At her parents' house, dinner was served with a degree of formality that told her this wasn't a casual meal. Her mother had made something elaborate. Her father had opened wine. They spoke around the subject for most of the first course, which was uncomfortable in a predictable way. It was her father who finally said it. He was looking at his plate when he said it. "We've been hearing about the Caldwell family, your husband's family." "What about them?" Nora asked. "They're significant. In various sectors." Her father's tone had the careful brightness of a man who had done research he hoped wasn't obvious. Her mother joined. "We thought, if you have any kind of relationship with his family, it might be something we could all benefit from. Having a connection there." Nora put her fork down. Her mother said, "We're not suggesting anything inappropriate, Nora. We just thought, you thought that because I married someone whose last name means something, I'm a bridge you can use." Her father opened his mouth. Her mother said something about how that wasn't what they meant. Nora listened for 30 seconds. Then she put her napkin on the table, thanked them for dinner, and left before the main course arrived. She took a bus back to the apartment. It was faster than driving, and she needed to sit somewhere and look at the city for a while. When she came home, Ethan was still at the desk. He looked at her face when she came in. "Bad," he said. "They didn't call to see me. They called because they heard your family name." He nodded slowly, like this tracked with a pattern he already knew. "I know what that's like," he said. His voice was even, but something under it had the texture of old knowledge. She sat on the couch. "Your family did the same thing to you, in different terms." He set down his pen. "They looked at me after the accident and saw a liability. Then they saw an opportunity to manage the liability in a way that suited them. The end result is the same. You stop being a person and start being a resource someone wants to leverage. Nora looked at him. How do you not let that make you angry? I let it make me useful, he said. Anger is expensive, precision is free. She thought about that for a moment. It wasn't advice, he wasn't offering it as advice. He was just describing how he'd worked. She found herself respecting it. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. A news notification. She almost scrolled past before she read the headline. Marsh Analytics announces restructuring after major client review. She stared at it. She read the article. There was no mention of Caldwell Capital. There was no mention of the reason for the contract terminations. There was only the language of business adjusting, restructuring, consolidation, re-evaluation. She looked up at Ethan. He was back to reading the document in front of him. She thought about the phone call she'd overheard the first night, the instruction about the Morrison file. She thought about Leo and the portfolio. She thought about the spreadsheet she'd seen a corner of on the desks. She was starting to understand the shape of things. She didn't, not yet. The firm Colin works for, she said instead, Marsh Analytics, yes? He didn't look up. They're having a rough week, apparently. He turned a page. Markets are uncertain, he said, a long pause. Right, Nora said. She set her phone down. Later that night, Leo called again. She heard Ethan's voice from the balcony, quieter than usual. Colin Marsh is asking questions about me specifically. He's trying to find out who I am and what I control. A pause. Let him look. Just make sure he doesn't find anything we don't want him to find. Nora lay in the bedroom staring at the ceiling. The man she had married in 6 minutes on a courthouse had just confirmed, without confirming anything directly, that he was protecting her in the only way that had ever actually worked in her experience. Quietly, precisely, and completely. She was not sure what to do with that. She pulled the blanket up and closed her eyes. She would figure it out in the morning. The letter arrived on a Thursday, handwritten, on thick cream stationery, with a return address in Dunthorpe, which was exactly the kind of neighborhood that didn't need to advertise itself. The envelope was addressed to Ethan and his wife. The handwriting was decisive, the letters large and evenly spaced. Ethan read it twice. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, My grandmother would like to have dinner with us. Your grandmother? Eleanor Caldwell. He folded the letter. She's not like the rest of them. Nora waited. She built the original company, he said. She handed it to my father's generation. She has opinions about what they've done with it. He set the letter on the desk. She's asking to meet you. They went the following Sunday. The house in Dunthorpe was large in the way that old money was large, not aggressively, not performatively, but with the settled permanence of something that had been standing for a long time and planned to keep standing. There were oak trees along the driveway. The interior smelled of beeswax and books. Eleanor Caldwell was 74 years old and moved like someone who had decided at some point that age was a fact and not a condition. She greeted Ethan with directness, and she greeted Nora with careful observation. She had a way of asking questions that sounded conversational but contained precise measurements. Tell me how you met, she said at the table. Nora told her. She didn't soften it or restructure it. She said she had walked out of her own wedding because her fiancé was with her sister, that she had sat on a planter outside the venue, and that she had asked the man sitting beside her to marry her because he had looked at her like she was a person. Eleanor listened without interrupting. When Nora finished, Eleanor said, And you knew nothing about who he was when you asked? Nothing. And now? More than I did, Nora said carefully. Less than everything. Eleanor seemed to appreciate that. The front door opened during the soup course, and a man came in without knocking. He was in his 60s, broad-shouldered, wearing the studied casualness of someone who wanted to look like they hadn't dressed for an occasion. He introduced himself as Warren and moved through pleasantries with the ease of someone who had spent decades making pleasantries serve particular purposes. He sat down without being invited. His manner toward Ethan was civil, with something underneath it, a particular quality of attention, like someone measuring an opponent. His manner toward Nora was dismissive in the way that dismissed people don't notice until later. I heard you'd gotten married, he said to Ethan. Nobody called me. I didn't realize you were on the list, Ethan said. Warren's smile didn't reach his eyes. Family is family. He looked at Nora. We like to know when things change, for the sake of everyone involved. Eleanor said, Warren, the soup is getting cold. He glanced at Eleanor with the look of a man who deferred to her only when necessary and had been calculating when necessary for a long time. After dinner, Warren left before dessert with an excuse that satisfied no one. Eleanor took Nora into the study. She opened a drawer and brought out something small, a ring, simple gold with a flat stone. She held it out. This belonged to my grandmother, Eleanor said. I wore it until my fingers wouldn't allow it. It goes to the wife with the strongest hands. She looked at Nora steadily. I've been waiting a long time. Nora took the ring. It was lighter than she expected. She held it in her palm for a moment, looking at it. You don't have to, Ethan said quietly from the doorway. I know. Nora slipped it on. It fit almost perfectly. Eleanor said, Good. On the drive home, Ethan was quiet for most of the way. The city appeared around them, gradually. Nora watched the lights. What is Warren to you? She said. Not a question, a statement waiting for information. Ethan's hands were steady on the wheel. My father's brother, he said. He stepped into operational control of the company after my accident, and he wasn't supposed to. A beat. There were certain structures in place, Ethan said. That protected things. He assumed those structures meant I was finished. Were you? No. She had heard the precision in that single syllable. She had learned, over the past weeks, that when Ethan used fewer words than a situation seemed to require, it was because the words he chose were doing more work than they appeared to. The man who decided my accident was convenient, he said. He was looking at the road. His voice had the flatness of something stated without wanting to turn it into an event. Nora looked at him. What does that mean? It means exactly what it sounds like. He glanced at her. Not yet, Nora. I'll tell you when there's more of it to tell. She nodded. She turned back to the window. As they pulled into the apartment's parking area, she noticed a car she didn't recognize parked across the street. She thought nothing of it. But the next morning, when she went to the corner hardware store, she noticed the same make and color 2 blocks over. She filed it away without remarking on it. That night she was reading in the living room when Ethan came in from the bedroom with a call going on his phone. He paused when he saw her. That's fine, he said into the phone. Set up the alert. If it moves from monitoring to contact, I want to know immediately. He ended the call. She looked at him. Warren, he said simply. He's watching us? He's watching the situation. Ethan set the phone down. He's trying to understand what he's dealing with. And what is he dealing with? Something shifted in Ethan's expression. Very brief. More than he's accounted for, he said. He went back to the desk. Nora looked at Eleanor's ring on her finger. The stone caught the lamplight. She thought about what it meant to be inside a war you didn't start and couldn't fully see yet. She thought about the kind of patience required for that. She had been patient her entire life. She had watched Sophie get the attention, the praise, the second chances. She had watched her parents arrange their concern around the person who demanded it most loudly. She had watched Colin choose her, then reconsider, then choose Sophie instead. And she had been patient about that too, right up until it became undeniable. She was done being patient about things she couldn't change. But this was different. This was a situation where patience wasn't passivity. It was preparation. She picked up her book and kept reading. She was awake until late. Eleanor's annual charity gala was held at the family estate, or rather at the grounds of the estate, which had been landscaped into something that served the purpose of elegant outdoor events. The invitation specified black tie. Nora spent 2 evenings altering a dress she already owned, navy silk she'd bought for a different occasion and never worn, fitted at the waist, simple. She did it herself. Ethan watched her work from the doorway of the bedroom on the second evening, without commenting. When she was finished, she held it up. It's presentable, she said. It's more than that, he said, and went back to the desk. They arrived together. Ethan drove. The grounds were lit with warm light, strung between old trees, and the guest list was composed of the kind of people who had arrived at the level where they no longer needed to assert themselves in rooms. They simply entered, and the rooms organized around them. Nora had worked enough events to read this kind of gathering quickly. She noted who spoke to whom, who deferred, who glanced toward the main entrance when new arrivals came in. She also noted, within the first 20 minutes, the moment when Sophie and Colin arrived. They had come through a contact, someone in Colin's professional network, who had a peripheral connection to the Caldwell family through an industry association. Sophie was in a gown that cost more than Nora's rent. Colin was in a suit she didn't recognize but could price. They looked polished, composed, and ready to work the room. Sophie spotted Nora and paused. For 1/2 second, something honest crossed her face. Then it was gone, replaced by the expression she wore when she was performing graciousness. Nora looked away first. Near the entrance, Ethan was speaking with an older man, one of Eleanor's contemporaries, silver-haired, with a kind of posture that came from decades of physical confidence. The man leaned down to shake Ethan's hand. "Chairman," he said, "it's been far too long." Sophie, 10 feet away, was mid-sentence with someone from the catering coordination team. She stopped. Nora watched without watching. Over the following 40 minutes, she watched Sophie follow a trail. Sophie spoke to a woman near the garden, then to a couple near the bar. Nora could not hear the conversations, but she could read the pattern. Sophie asked questions, and the answers were doing something to her composure. Colin joined her at some point, and Sophie pulled him aside with the quick economy of someone who needed to say something urgent in private. Nora noted this and moved on. An hour into the evening, Colin found her near the garden. He looked, Nora thought, like a man who had run a calculation and arrived at a conclusion he was embarrassed by. "Nora," he said, "I was hoping to talk to you. We're talking. I want to apologize." Properly. He said it with the particular sincerity of someone who had prepared to say it. "What happened? I know I hurt you. I've been thinking about it since." She looked at him and waited. Look, I understand you're in a complicated situation now." His voice dropped. "I feel for putting you in that position. So, I want to offer something. A financial settlement from me to give you some stability. It's the least I can." "Stop," she said. He stopped. "You came here to ask me something," she said. "The apology is real, I can tell, but it's wrapped around an ask. What do you need, Colin?" He exhaled. He looked toward where Ethan was sitting with Eleanor and 2 board members. "I need to understand the situation. With Marsh Analytics. The contracts that. You need me to intercede with my husband on your behalf." A silence. "That man you called a complicated situation," she said, "has more spine sitting in that chair than you've had standing up in the 3 years I knew you." Her voice was quiet and even. "Don't speak of my husband again. Not to me. Not in this context." Colin looked at her for a moment. He started to say something. She turned and walked back toward the main terrace. She found Ethan near the entrance. Eleanor was beside him, standing straight in a charcoal gown, watching the assembled guests with the expression of someone taking a census. "You handled that well," Ethan said without looking at her. "How do you know what I said?" "I don't. I know how you're walking." She looked at him briefly. Then she looked at the room. Near the bar, Sophie was saying something to Colin. Colin was nodding slowly and looking at the floor. Eleanor touched Nora's arm. "Come stand here with me," she said. "I want to make the donation remarks, and I want you beside Ethan when I do." Eleanor stepped to the small temporary stage near the terrace. The room quieted for her, not because she raised her voice, but because she had the quality of someone who expected to be heard and always had been. She spoke for 2 minutes about the cause, educational access, scholarships for students in regional communities. She mentioned the family's long involvement. Then she said, "This year's donation of $3.2 million comes from Caldwell Capital Group." She gestured toward Ethan, our chairman. The room applauded. Ethan inclined his head once. He did not stand. His expression was composed and private. Nora stood beside him. She kept her face still. Sophie was 20 feet away. The applause was still going. Sophie looked like someone watching something unfold that she had not prepared for. Colin's hand was on her arm, but she wasn't registering it. Nora did not look at them. When the applause finished, Eleanor stepped down. She leaned to Nora and said very quietly, "Good." Just that word. They left the gala at 10. Ethan drove. The city moved past the windows. The night was quiet. At a red light, Nora said, "I saw the article at your grandmother's house last month, the framed one near the door." She kept her voice neutral, and I heard what they called you tonight. The light changed. Ethan drove. "I know," he said. A long silence. "Why?" she said. He kept his eyes on the road. "Because I wanted to know what I was to you," he said, "before you knew what I was worth." She looked at him. "I married someone I didn't know," she said. "I did that because I had nothing left to lose, and because you looked at me like I was real, not because of a name or a number." He said nothing. "You know that," she said. "You already know that." "Yes," he said. "But there's more you should hear, and I'd like to tell you." He turned onto the street toward the apartment. "Tonight, when we get home," she nodded. She looked out the window. The city turned around them. She thought about Eleanor's ring on her finger and about what it meant to be handed something by someone who had been watching and deciding for a very long time. They sat at the kitchen table. Ethan made tea. He did this sometimes when he needed to move through something methodically, she had noticed. He brought 2 cups and set them down, and then he talked for a long time, which was unusual for him. Caldwell Capital Group had been built by Eleanor over 30 years, then passed to Ethan's father. When his father died, the ownership structure transferred according to a trust Eleanor had established in Ethan's name, specifically in Ethan's name, not shared among the extended family. Eleanor had done this intentionally. She had watched what her own son did with what she handed him, and she had made decisions accordingly. Ethan had been running the company, quietly, completely, remotely, for the entire 5 years since the accident. Leo Porter was his chief of staff and the person who physically represented the company in public settings. Every significant decision, every major investment, every capital allocation, all of it came from Ethan, through Leo, in ways that the family had either not noticed or had decided were safe to ignore. Warren had assumed operational management of day-to-day functions and believed this constituted control. He had not looked closely enough at the trust structure to understand that operational management was not the same as ownership. 5 years, Nora said. From this apartment. She thought about the laptop, the spreadsheets, the calls at odd hours, the way Leo arrived and departed like someone answering to a principal, not visiting a consultant. "Why tell me now?" "Because you already know most of it," he said. "And because what comes next, you need to understand what you're standing near when it happens." The accident, he said, had not been an accident. He'd known this for 3 years. A former employee at the auto repair shop had reached out to Leo, a man named Dale Farah, who had done the brake work on Ethan's car 5 years ago, and had been paid to do it wrong. He had been paid by someone in the Caldwell organization. The trail, when Leo traced it, led to Warren. Leo had the man's recorded testimony. It had been held for the right moment. Warren had discovered, through a contact on the board, that Ethan had appeared publicly at the gala as chairman. Warren was now moving to force a board review. His argument would invoke a charter clause about leadership capacity, meaning, in Warren's framing, that a chairman who had been absent for 5 years and had not been publicly visible was unfit to continue. He had scheduled the board meeting for 48 hours later. "He thinks this is still 5 years ago," Ethan said. "He thinks he's the one who's been building something." "What have you been building?" Nora asked. "A case." He was quiet for a moment, and a company that's worth 4 times what it was when I disappeared. She looked at him. The tea was cooling between them. "What do you need from me?" He paused. The pause had the quality of something he'd thought about before. Nothing operationally. "Leo and I have the board covered, but..." Another pause. "It would mean something," he said carefully. "If you were there," she said. "At the board meeting." "Yes." She nodded. "All right," she said. He looked at her. Something in his face shifted, a very small change, but she had learned to read his small changes. It was the look of a person who had expected to have to justify the request and found they didn't need to. "Tell me about the meeting," she said. "What's going to happen?" "Warren is going to invoke the capacity clause. I'm going to chair the meeting. Leo is going to present the trust documentation and the 5 years of decision records. Then Leo is going to play the testimony from Farah. And Warren? Warren is going to have a very bad day." She picked up her tea. It was still warm. And after? After, I expect the board to begin an independent review, which will include the testimony from Ferre, which will go to the district attorney's office. He was very calm about this. It will take time. These things always take time. But it will happen. She thought about the night of the accident. 5 years ago, a car on a bridge, brake lines cut, a man left burned and broken in a wreck that everyone around him decided was easier to call an accident. She thought about what it cost to carry that for 5 years in a small apartment, while running a billion-dollar company through a laptop and a single trusted person. She thought about the first night she heard him in pain through the wall and the way he'd bitten down on it rather than let her hear. He asked you to swallow that, she said. Warren. He arranged it, and then your family closed ranks and asked you to live with it. My mother asked me to live with it, he said. His voice was measured. She wasn't wrong about what a public trial would cost the family name. She was wrong about asking me to pay that cost. Yes, Nora said she was. He looked at her for a long moment. She met it. You're not going to ask me to forgive him, he said. No, she said. I'm not going to ask you anything about that. He nodded. Leo called later that evening. Warren filed the board meeting notice. It confirmed for Thursday at 10. A pause. He's also been in contact with some of the independent directors, running a campaign. Let him run it, Ethan said. Schedule the AV equipment in the main conference room and send the trust documentation to the 3 independent directors tonight. Standard channels. Of course. Another pause. Sir, the board members are going to see you in person for the first time in 5 years, I know. Some of them are going to have questions, I know. Ethan looked at Nora. Tell them their chairman will be there in person at 10 o'clock, and he'll answer every question they have. He ended the call. Nora finished her tea. The apartment was quiet. Outside, the city hummed its ordinary late-night sound. Get some sleep, Ethan said. Thursday is going to be a full day. She stood and picked up both cups and rinsed them at the sink. She dried her hands. She turned. For what it's worth, she said. He looked at her. The man who chose to build quietly instead of collapse. That's the person I've been living with for the past weeks. She said it without embellishment, just as a fact. That's the man I married on a courthouse step because he looked at me like I was real. Whatever happens Thursday, that's who I said yes to. Not the chairman, not the $1 billion. That. He was quiet for a long moment. Thank you, he said. He said it simply, without qualification. She went to the bedroom. She lay in the dark and listened to him move through the apartment, heard him settle at the desk, heard the soft sound of keys. He was working. He was always working. She thought it was a very good quality in a person when the work was honest. She fell asleep before 11 and slept all the way through the night for the first time in weeks. The Caldwell Capital Group offices were on the 14th floor of a glass building in the Pearl District. Nora had passed the building many times over the years. It was visible from a park she used to cut through on her way to work, but she had never had a reason to go inside. They arrived at 9:40. Leo was waiting in the lobby. He and Ethan shook hands without ceremony, the practiced ease of 2 people who had been doing difficult things together for a long time. Leo said, "The 3 independent directors have reviewed the trust documentation. I don't know what to make of their faces yet." "Their faces don't matter," Ethan said. "The structure matters." They went up. Nora stayed at the edge of the room, near the window. She had not been asked to sit at the table. She was there the way a person stands at the door of a courtroom, not the principal, but present, witnessing. The boardroom was glass and steel and looked out over the city. The board members were already seated when they came in. 8 people, most of them older, all of them with the posture of people accustomed to these rooms. A few of them looked at Ethan directly. 1 or 2 looked at their phones with studied indifference. One, near the far end, had an expression she read as something between surprise and calculation. Warren was already there. He was at the far end of the table, 2 seats from the head. When Ethan wheeled in, Warren's expression reorganized. It took him just a fraction of a second too long to settle into whatever it had been before. Ethan sat at the head of the table. He opened the meeting. "Thank you for being here," he said. He spoke without preamble. "I understand there's a motion to review leadership capacity. I'm here to address that. We'll take that up after Leo presents the documentation, Warren said, very smoothly. Ethan, think what the board would first appreciate is an explanation of your absence from Leo? Ethan said. Leo stood. He had a projector connected and a series of documents that filled the screen at the far end of the room. 5 years of documented decisions, investment allocations, acquisition approvals, strategic directives. Every one of them time-stamped, traceable to Ethan's credentials, and authenticated communications. As Leo walked through the record, the room's quality shifted. A woman near the center, Helen Burr. One of the senior independent directors was leaning forward by the second slide. She said, at one point, "These allocation decisions in Q3 of last year, these were yours?" Ethan said yes. She looked at the board member beside her. Warren said, "This doesn't." Ethan looked at him. Warren stopped. Leo finished the presentation. Then he said, "I have one additional piece of documentation. I'll ask for your patience and your discretion." He connected a second file, a recording, a man's voice, even and quiet, talking with the deliberate care of someone who has rehearsed what they're going to say. Dale Ferre. The recording. He stated his name. He stated the date of the recording. He stated that in the fall of 5 years ago he had been employed at an auto service shop and had been contracted, separately and outside normal channels, to perform specific modifications to a vehicle scheduled for service. He described the modification. He named the person who had arranged and paid for the work, Warren Caldwell. The room was silent when the recording ended. Nora watched Warren's hands on the table. They were flat and still, the stillness of someone who understood that motion at this moment would be read. Helen Burr said, "Is this authenticated?" Leo said, "Yes." The recording was authenticated by an independent forensic audio firm 6 months ago. I can provide the certification. Helen nodded. The board member at Warren's left leaned back. The one at his right had his phone out. He was not looking at social media. Warren said, "This is a fabrication. This is." Ethan looked at him. He said it quietly, without heat. "The board has the documentation, the recording, the certification. If you want to contest the authentication, that's something you can pursue through appropriate channels." He folded his hands on the table. "But I'd like to conclude this meeting first." He called the vote on the capacity clause. It failed 8-0, Warren not participating. He called a second motion, a formal referral of the recording and associated materials to the company's general counsel for assessment of legal obligations. It passed 7-1, Warren abstaining. Ethan closed his notebook. He looked down the table. "We'll schedule a full board review of operations for next quarter. I'll send the dates through Leo. Thank you for your time." He turned his chair. Warren stood. "Ethan, the meeting is closed," Ethan said without turning. He moved toward the door. Nora fell in beside him. She didn't say anything. There was nothing to say that the morning hadn't already said. In the elevator, Leo exhaled. He didn't speak. He looked at the numbers descending, and he let his shoulders drop slightly, which was the most Nora had ever seen him show. In the lobby, they passed through the main entrance and out to the sidewalk. The city was doing its ordinary Thursday morning business. People in coffee shop lines, delivery trucks double-parked, a cyclist running a red light with the usual optimism. Colin Marsh was standing on the sidewalk outside the building. He had clearly been waiting. He was in a suit, and he had the alert, prepared look of someone who had done their research and arrived with a plan. "He's Ethan," and then stopped himself. "Mr. Caldwell." "I was hoping," Ethan looked at him. "I wanted to speak with you about Marsh Analytics," Colin said. He was making an effort to be direct. "I understand there were some concerns flagged in the compliance review." "I think if we sat down, Marsh Analytics was reviewed," Ethan said. "The review is complete. The determination was final." Colin glanced at Nora. She said nothing. "The firm has a strong track record," Colin said. "I think if you looked at I have looked at it," Ethan said. "The answer is no." He moved toward the car. Leo opened the passenger door. Nora looked at Colin for one moment, not unkindly, not warmly, just seeing him, which was something she had done before and which had always been more than he'd done for her, and then she got in. Colin stood on the sidewalk. The car pulled away from the curb. "He'll try again," Leo said from the back seat. "He'll find the answer is still no," Ethan said. Nora looked out the window. The building fell behind them. She thought about the board members' faces when the recording played. She thought about Warren's hands on the table. She thought about 5 years in a small apartment, not disappearing, building. She thought it was a remarkable thing to have chosen to do, and a more remarkable thing to have done well. "Lunch?" Ethan said. "Yes," she said. "Somewhere quiet. I know a place." He drove. She looked at the city going past. The morning felt like something that had been a long time coming and had finally arrived, and now everything on the other side of it was a different kind of question. The following Monday, the news item ran in the business section of the regional paper. It was short, 3 paragraphs about a leadership review at a Portland-based private investment firm, a board vote, and a referral to legal counsels regarding the circumstances of an executive's departure. Warren Caldwell's name appeared. Ethan's name appeared. No one who wasn't already watching would have understood the full shape of it, but the people who were paying attention understood enough. Warren's suspension was confirmed by the end of the week. Leo told Ethan the board had voted unanimously. An external law firm had been engaged to conduct a parallel review of the break-line testimony and to assess what, if any, criminal referral was appropriate. The mechanic's lawyer had reached out to cooperate, Ethan said. Good. He said nothing else about it that day. Nora was making coffee when Sophie called. She stared at the incoming number for 2 rings. Then she answered. Sophie said she was sorry. The words came out in a sequence that had been composed carefully. Nora could hear the structure of it, but underneath the structure was something genuine. Sophie said she had been selfish. She said she had known, earlier than she'd admitted to herself, that things with Colin had been developing, and she hadn't stopped it. She said she had told herself that Nora and Colin weren't right for each other, which was probably true but wasn't the point, and she knew it. I know what I did, Sophie said. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that I know. Nora listened. She let Sophie finish. Then she said, I hear you. She paused. I can't give you more than that right now. I know, Sophie said. Okay. How are things with Colin? A long pause, complicated. Sophie's voice had lost the composed quality. The firm is, it's a difficult time. Another pause. I'm not asking you to do anything about that. I know, Nora said. I didn't want you to think I was calling for that, Olivia, Nora said. And she did. She could hear the difference. They said goodbye without resolving anything, which was honest. Resolution wasn't what a phone call could do. Her father called the following day. He said, we handled this wrong, just that. No elaboration, no managed revision of events. It was the simplest thing he'd said to her in a long time, and she thought it probably cost him something. She said, I know, Dad. She let the silence between them do the work of everything else. Ethan's mother called on Thursday. She had heard about the board meeting. Her voice was careful in the way that meant she had drafted what she was going to say multiple times. She said she was sorry for how things had been handled after the accident. She said she had told herself at the time that she was protecting the family, but she understood now that there was a difference between protecting a name and protecting a person's. Ethan was in the kitchen when the call came. He listened, he said. I know you believed you were doing the right thing. A pause. I'm not angry at you anymore, but some things can't go back to what they were. Another pause. I hope you understand that. She said she did. He ended the call. He sat in the kitchen for a while afterward. Nora was reading in the living room and she could see him through the doorway, just sitting, looking at the table. Not in distress, exactly. More like someone finishing a long calculation. After a while, she got up and brought him tea. She set it in front of him and sat across from him. He looked at the cup. Thank you, he said. The call sounded like it needed to happen, she said. It did. He picked up the cup. Some things take a long time to find their right moment. She thought about what that meant in the context of everything she knew now. 5 years of building quietly, of waiting for the right moment, of understanding that arriving at the right time was more powerful than arriving angry. Can I ask you something? She said. Yes. That night at the venue, you said you'd been there 2 hours. You were watching. I was waiting for a meeting that had been canceled, he said. The venue was hosting a conference the next day, and there was supposed to be a pre-meeting logistics call. It was pushed. He looked at her. I was sitting outside with coffee because there was nowhere better be at that moment, which was true. And you watched everything happen. I watched a woman walk out of something she should have walked out of much sooner, he said, and do it with more composure than the situation deserved. She looked at him, and then she asked me something, he said, and I said yes. Why? He considered. Because you asked as though you meant it, he said, not as a performance. You were in the worst situation of your recent life, and you looked at me, and you asked as if you'd thought about it. He set the cup down. Nobody had looked at me like I was a reasonable answer to anything in 5 years. Nora sat with that for a moment. I didn't know who you were, she said. I know. I still would have asked, she said. He looked at her steadily. I know that too, he said, now. Outside, the city moved through its ordinary rhythms. Nora finished her tea. Ethan went back to his desk. There was always something at the desk, but he left the door between the living room and his workspace slightly open, which he had never done before, and she understood it for what it was. That evening, Leo called with a final update. Marsh Analytics had announced it was entering a restructuring process. Collison had resigned his position as senior analyst. The announcement was brief and the phrasing was corporate neutral, but Nora, reading it on her phone, understood the actual shape of it. She set the phone down. She felt nothing she needed to call satisfaction and nothing she needed to call pity. Just the clean sense of a situation having moved to its logical conclusion. Ethan came in from the desk. He saw her looking at her phone. Marsh Analytics. He said, yes. He looked at her. It's done, she said. It's done, he agreed. She put the phone away. He went to the kitchen and came back with 2 glasses of water, just water, simple, nothing performative about it, and set one in front of her. She took it. They sat in the living room without talking for a while, and the silence was not the same silence as the one on the first night. This one was inhabited. This one had something in it. She thought that was probably the beginning of something, though she didn't have a word for what. Eleanor held the press event at the Caldwell Capital offices on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks after the board meeting. She had insisted on it. Ethan had not argued. The lobby had been arranged with chairs and a small podium. 40 people. Board members, senior staff, 3 journalists from business publications, a handful of Eleanor's own contemporaries who had watched the Caldwell family for decades. Nora stood to the left of Ethan's chair. Leo stood to the right. Eleanor spoke for 11 minutes. She did not soften anything. She said the company had been built over 30 years and handed to a generation that had treated it as a vehicle for personal interest rather than a legacy to protect. She said that 5 years ago her grandson had survived a deliberate act that the family had chosen to conceal, and that this concealment was a failure of the kind she could not defend. She said his name, Ethan Caldwell, and she said it clearly and without hesitation, and she introduced him as the chairman of the company he had been leading from a modest apartment for the entire duration of his recovery. Ethan spoke for 7 minutes. He was brief and exact. He thanked Leo. He thanked the board members who had participated in good faith. He said that the company's direction going forward would be publicly available and that he welcomed scrutiny. He did not perform emotion. He stated facts. Nora watched the journalists take notes. She watched the senior staff in the back of the room, some of them seeing Ethan for the first time, their faces doing the work of recalibration. She watched Eleanor during Ethan's remarks. The old woman stood very still, and her expression was the expression of someone who had been waiting a long time and had decided to be present for the arrival. After the remarks, people moved through the room in the way they did after these things. Drinks appeared, conversation gathered. A woman from the board, Helen Burr, crossed to where Nora was standing. She said, "You were there on Thursday." In the boardroom, Nora said yes. Helen said, "I'm glad he had someone beside him." She said it simply as a fact. Nora said, "So am I." Her mother's message came through on her phone while the event was still going. 4 words, "I'm proud of you." Nora read it once. She put the phone in her pocket. She did not respond immediately. The message was true to it mattered, and it also arrived 4 weeks after it would have cost more to send, which was the kind of timing that required its own processing. She would respond. Just not yet. The car on the way home was quiet. The afternoon had gone silver with cloud cover, and the city looked soft at the edges. Ethan was at the wheel. Nora was watching a pigeon trying to land on a traffic light. "Your grandmother was good today," she said. "She's always good when she decides to be." He glanced at her. "How are you?" "Fine." She considered it more carefully. "Actually fine." He nodded. They drove another block, he said. "I have something for you." He said it without preface, the way he said most things. "What is it?" "At home." At home, he went to the desk and opened the left-hand drawer. He brought out a small box, not a jewelry case exactly, more like the kind of thing you'd find in a hardware store, a small cardboard square. He set it on the table in front of her. Inside was a ring. Simple silver band, plain, no stone, unornamented. Exactly the kind of thing someone bought because they thought about what they were saying with it. "Eleanor's ring is the family ring," he Simpson said. "That one is about history and obligation and being accepted into something." He looked at her. "This one is from me." She looked at it, then at him. "Why this?" she said. "Because you came to a physical therapist to learn my pain with your own hands," he said. "Because you blocked your sister's number without drama. Because when I gave you almost nothing for weeks, you paid attention to everything and didn't resent me for it." He paused. "Because on the worst day of your life, you sat on a planter outside a building and asked a question you meant entirely." She picked up the ring. It was lighter than Eleanor's, warmer somehow. "I don't need you to be the chairman's wife," he said. "I need the person who fixed the window latch and made coffee before I was awake." She looked at him for a long moment. "You already have that person," she said. "I know." He held her gaze. "I'd like to make it official with her own ring." She slipped it on. It went on the right hand, next to Eleanor's on the left, and the asymmetry seemed right to her. Two different things that were both true. She looked down at both hands for a moment. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. Outside, the cloud cover had broken a little, and there was evening light coming through the window, the long sideways kind that makes ordinary rooms look significant. Nora pushed his chair to the window, and they sat together, looking at the city. Below, the street was full of people doing the usual things. Walking fast, standing still, deciding something, forgetting something. Beginning and ending small private dramas that were invisible from above. She thought about what it meant to have started in the worst moment and arrived somewhere unplanned. She thought about what it meant that she had asked because she had nothing left to lose, and that the answer had been yes because he'd been looking for someone who wasn't looking for anything. Neither of them spoke for a while. The silence held something now. It wasn't the same one from the beginning of the story. If you've ever had to choose between what the world sees and what you know is real, you already know what Nora chose. Tell me in the comments, did she make the right call?